Prerna Makaria, founder of Outline Africa. Perhaps you'd just like to repeat your surname if it doesn't sound familiar to you.
It's Mukharia. And Outline India, Alison. I'd love to start Outline Africa, but maybe for today we'll go with Outline India.
Yes, sorry. I apologize for that too. Africa focused. Please go ahead, because I know you also want to speak about data collection and some exciting examples of community participation.
Right. No, thank you for that, Alison. I think it is so important that we use forums such as these to talk about data for development, evidence-based decision-making, because I feel that with AI and with technology, the developing side of the world doesn't want to talk about its developmental challenges as much. I don't know if it's a sense of embarrassment, but we don't feel as comfortable talking about the superset of the have-nots, right? 50% of humanity is still not online. I don't know how many forums are dedicated to talking about that 55% of humanity, right? And if I talk about India specifically, we're doing so well on the tech front, we're doing so well on the inclusion front, but there's so much more that still needs to be done, Alison, right? 60% of us still live in rural areas, right? And when you talk about the elderly, when you talk about children, when you talk about women, how many of those stakeholders do you think really have cell phones or have digital access, right? Or are they using that digital access for the purposes that we're here to discuss today? No, not so much. So then what is the one way of reaching out to them? Going out there, deploying people, meeting them in person, collecting data is the one way and one way alone of sort of including them. And when I talk about making our data policies more inclusive, I'm talking about farmer groups, I'm talking about kids who are not learning as much, I'm talking about healthcare centers that don't provide the best healthcare out there, right? How do you really get information from them about what's happening on the ground, right? You have to have research methods which include these supersets. And so for that reason now, we talk about participatory research. It's not about me sitting in my office in New Delhi or somebody sitting in Washington, D.C., who will come up with a research design and, tell us what policies to implement or what social schemes to launch. It just doesn't work in the Indian context. I'll just take an example. We worked for a big bank very recently, and this was about climate change and how it affects vulnerable groups, specifically agrarian communities. And we came up with a list of solutions and innovations that might have worked on the ground. And then we went to the field and we started collecting data. And we realized that a lot of problems facing these farmers were very basic. They didn't have electricity, or they had basic phones. They didn't have smartphones. And so then how do you sort of have your startups innovate for these super groups, right? Because India is still agrarian to a large extent. And then, we also we actually had to revise our list of innovations and tech solutions for these communities. We then came up with, included startups that send out SMSs or voice texts or just call the farmers up so they know about the change in weather patterns, and they will know when subsidies have been so delivered to the local distribution shops. And I think you really need these startups. You really need this kind of innovation, but innovation that really works in the developing country context, right?
Thank you so much. And I know Baratang wants to come in on the issue.
So I think, Alison, I think aggregation, collation of data and collaboration across the spectrum is the only way forward. And I think what this really requires is an alignment of incentive structures, be it between your private stakeholders, your companies, your consultancy firms, be it your startups, the innovative ones or the tech-driven startups, whether it's your civil society members who get money in from philanthropists or foundation. There has to be a common goal that we all work towards. And I'm going to try and explain this via a bunch of examples, right? We took the example of what happened during COVID, right? And among other things, I remember my organization, we collaborated very closely and advised the state government on how they need to use their volunteers who use these apps on their phones for distribution of certain government incentives. We advised them on how we could use the same app and the same set of volunteers to now collect information about what people needed because of COVID, right? Did they need healthcare amenities? Did they need food at the household level? Were they suffering because they'd lost their jobs? So just to get that information in, right? So in that case, we saw a startup coming forward to advise a government body using a tech platform, right? We've spoken a little bit about AI, right? Again, right, Times did this big story on countries such as India, and I know there are a few countries in Africa that serve as the back end for a lot of AI-related work. So when I take my phone and point it towards a bottle, for Google Lens to sense that it's a bottle, there's somebody or a lot of people at the back end who are looking at thousands and millions of pictures of bottles and telling the technology platform that, listen, when you see something like this, it's a bottle. Or when you see something like a plant, this is a plant, right? Yeah. So you need regulation around AI. So what I'm trying to say is that it requires that we regulate, that we get different parties to collaborate so that we're all moving forward.
Thanks, Bren.